So we're jumping back into Henry Staunton's testimony to the Business and Trade Select Committee today in the UK Parliament, and he says there's a lot of misremembering and lying going on. And he says the government compensation scheme, before the furore caused by the public outrage following Mr Bates versus the Post Office, which aired on ITV at the beginning of January, he said the government compensation scheme was going nowhere, and indicates that actually the notes that are being produced for the Select Committee now by the government have actually been produced to respond to the Select Committee rather than, as opposed to his note, been produced at the time of the conversation, and indeed seem to be conclusions rather than things that were actually said at the time. Let's jump into the Select Committee.
Now, the Secretary of State, in her letter to me last Friday, says that these claims are completely fictitious and you have changed your story. Is that true?
I haven't at all. I think, of course, at the time, she said that they were lies because, of course, I couldn't find the file notes, so she said it was sort of a lie and it couldn't have been said. Since then, the tone of what she was saying about me has changed because, of course, I found the file note, thankfully. So I can only rest by the file note and the story which I've told you, which is my best recollection.
But the Secretary of State also says that your email dated 6th of January 2023 does not mention specifically compensation, and she is praying that in aid as evidence in her accusations against you.
Well, I think it's important that file note was not a verbatim comment of everything that took place. I mean, it was the particular phrases she used which I thought set the tone of what I was being asked. If it had been a verbatim file note of all the things I've talked about, it would have been a 3-page file note, but that's not what I set out to do. I set out to just say that this is the thrust of the conversation, and that's what I went through with Nick Reed afterwards.
So don't civil servants minute meetings that they're involved in as well? Surely to God. I mean, if they think there's something contradictory that's happened, or certainly something being discussed of such importance, surely they keep their own record. Surely there's a minute taker in these things. You know, that's the way it operates in private business. Why wouldn't it operate like that in government, particularly when dealing with such important issues as this?
So the Secretary of State and Sarah Munby have set out in subsequent correspondence that the budget for compensation is ring-fenced and provided by the government. Now, actually, Mr Reed said to us earlier that there is a post office contribution to the compensation fund, but
you're right. It is mainly ring-fenced and held within the Treasury, but how the ring-fencing, if the provision, say we have exoneration and much more money is paid out, the amount that you ring-fence becomes larger. Similarly, if we were tough on compensation, it became smaller, that would release the money that we've ring-fenced. So that's how ring-fencing works. And in respect of ring-fencing, it's really important, if you read the Post Office accounts, you'll see on page 65 where we talk about going concern, etc. In particular, when we say it's very specific, there is no financial guarantee. This letter of comfort very specifically says there's no financial guarantee. So clearly, from the point of the fact that it's ring fence, it sounds as if it's done and dusted, but actually it's not.
It's not a hard ring fence.
It's not.
So in terms of it being ring fenced, then essentially the money's been put aside. So I guess the issue here seems to be not that the money would be spent eventually, because it in effect isn't available for the post office, for example, to do other things with. However, it's almost seems like the issue here that Henry Staunton's been claiming has been raised with him by Sarah Munby has been the fact that actually, whilst the money's still on the books, it's still on the books, and once it's gone, so we need to spend less money. I mean, looking at this from the outside, it's always peculiar to try and understand this, because you think, well, if you can't use the money for anything else other than compensation, you might as well release it. But he does make the valid point there that in his view, yes, but if they manage to minimise the compensation, for example, even though that would be immoral and unethical, they should get the compensation that they deserve, obviously. Nevertheless, that is an option available for them to shore up the balance sheet, so to speak, and actually try to make things a bit better financially. But it certainly wouldn't be the right thing to do, and maybe this is an insight into some of the tension that there was between Henry Staunton and Kemi Badenoch.
They specifically say in the accounts this is not a guarantee. So,
well, that's interesting because the Secretary of State points out that the government has got no incentive to delay because there is a ring-fenced compensation fund. Do you buy that argument?
The answer is the only route. The big numbers are in respect of overturned convictions, and I think somebody referred to 4% that's been paid out. The fact is it was going nowhere in terms of the exoneration costs, and the whole thing opened up subsequent to the Mr Bates TV programme. Until that point, no headway was being made. So,
and those are fair comments to make because these are things we already know. They've already happened. We know how long the subpostmasters have been waiting and still continue to wait for compensations. That's undeniably true.
I think that's worth understanding.
In her letter and file notes, Sarah Munby says this. This is dated 21st of February. She says, we discussed the post office operational funding, not compensation funding. She goes on to say, I'm able to give you, the Secretary of State, the strongest reassurance that I did not at any point suggest to Mr Staunton or to imply to him in any way whatsoever that there should be a delayed compensation payments for postmasters.
I mean, those sound like conclusions versus what was actually said, and that distinction could become important.
I do not believe they should be delayed, and no minister has ever asked me to make delays. Does that assertion by Sarah Munby undermine your assertions?
Well, it does. Her file note is written a year and a day, a year and a month after my file note, so it's not a contemporaneous file note by any means. It's written with the purpose of answering this point. So I'm not casting any aspersions on Miss Munby, but that's worth fully understanding.
Do you think Sarah Munby may have misremembered?
There are a lot of issues going around about misremembering, lying, etc., and that's not what I want to get into. I'm just explaining what I know. I'm not here to guess. But
on the face of it, then, it appears that Sarah Munby may have walked away from your conversation with a different interpretation to you. That would be perhaps a generous
I think the fact is, when you talk about three levers, this is not a PhD in accounting. This is three very simple issues that we're talking about.
Well,
I don't think there's much room for misinterpretation.
But Sarah Munby does say in her file note, 21 February 2024, that there is, quotes, complete firewall between the two budgets for compensation and operations. But you're telling the committee this afternoon that it's not as simple as that.
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, it's, as I say, now that we've made all these issues on exoneration, the fact is the amount of money held in Treasury within this firewall ought to have been increased significantly because of the exoneration payments. So it's not a number that's fixed. And equally, as I say, if it goes down, more money is available for whatever, NHS, tax cuts or whatever it is.
The Secretary of State goes on to say...
So there is a political incentive, he's trying to suggest there, to minimising the compensation payments, so not just delaying them, actually reducing the total, whether you either reduce the amount that's being paid to each sub-postmaster or whether you reduce the scope for the sub-postmasters that are eligible for such compensation. You know, all we know factually at the moment is there has been a derisory amount of compensation offered to sub-postmasters. That's a fact at the moment. The motivations behind it that is suggesting it could be political, that we've got a budget coming up, that money could be used elsewhere. So obviously there is a certain angle that's worth exploring with this.